Somewhere in Shandong province, a factory floor hums with precision. Circuit boards, voltage converters, gyroscopic navigation modules, flight control systems, stamped with serial numbers that will never appear in any export manifest. These parts aren't going into consumer electronics, they're going into Shahed drones. The same kamikaze weapons that have struck oil tankers in the Gulf, hit US military installations, and rained down on Ukrainian cities for 2 years running. And they're shipping freely, right now, through a pipeline that runs from mainland China, through Hong Kong shell companies, across Pakistani corridors, and straight into IRGC warehouses, while the United States drops bombs on the very country receiving the delivery. 1,000 drones, transferred through the Pakistan corridor alone in the past 3 months. Engines labeled as industrial refrigeration units to clear customs. Beidou satellite receivers to guide them to their targets. Sensors, semiconductors, and electronic modules classified as dual-use technology, meaning they can build a washing machine or a weapon, depending on who's buying. The US has sanctioned 32 companies across 8 countries to stop this. It hasn't worked. The EU has sanctioned more. It hasn't worked either. Because sanctions were built for a world of linear supply chains, and what China has created is a network, adaptive, redundant, and buried so deep inside the legitimate global electronics trade that pulling it out would mean dismantling the trade itself. Here's what that network looks like from the inside, and why every attempt to shut it down has made it stronger. To understand China's role in Iran's drone war, you need to open up a Shahed and look at what's inside. Because the story isn't about finished weapons crossing borders. It's about thousands of individual components, each one legal to sell on its own, that together form a precision killing machine. Ukrainian intelligence teams have done exactly this. After recovering downed Shahed 136 drones from battlefields and intercepts, they cataloged every chip, every board, every sensor. The results were damning. Flight control systems sourced through Foxtech Hobby, a Hong Kong-registered company that bills itself as a civilian drone parts retailer. Engine components manufactured by Xiamen Limbach Aviation Engine, a Chinese firm later sanctioned by the US and EU. Electronic modules and sensors from Huixing High Technology in Shenzhen. Gyro navigation devices flagged by the US Treasury in a February 2025 sanctions round targeting Chinese front companies. And perhaps most critically, Beidou navigation receivers. China gave Iran access to Beidou, its military-grade global positioning system operated by the China National Space Administration. Since the war began, Iran has used Beidou not just for drone guidance, but to produce decoy signals that confuse American threat analysis systems and conceal actual troop movements. The procurement chain works like this. An Iranian entity, typically Pars Aero, or a subsidiary of Iran's aircraft manufacturing industrial company, places orders through intermediaries. The intermediaries, Hong Kong or mainland China firms with vague names and minimal digital presence, purchase dual-use components from legitimate Chinese manufacturers. The parts shipped to Iran directly or through transshipment points in the UAE, Malaysia, or Turkey. Each individual transaction looks legal. A voltage converter here, a semiconductor there, a batch of navigation modules listed as industrial automation components. None of these items are on weapons embargo lists individually. The dual-use classification means they have legitimate civilian applications. A gyroscope that stabilizes a drone also stabilizes a camera gimbal. An engine that powers a loitering munition also powers an agricultural sprayer. That's the genius of the system. The components are legal, the companies are real, the invoices are clean. Only the final assembly reveals the lie. And by then, the parts are in Iran, the money is in China, and the drone is on its way to a target. This is why sanctions keep failing. They're designed to stop illegal trade. This trade is legal right up until the moment it isn't. And that moment happens inside a country that doesn't recognize American jurisdiction. The US Commerce Department maintains an entity list of companies banned from receiving American technology without a license. But Chinese manufacturers don't need American technology anymore. They've developed indigenous alternatives. Russia's Yelabuga drone factory, which produces an estimated 2,700 Shahed variants per month, sources what Moscow calls 100% localized production. In reality, it's an assembly line of Chinese parts with Russian labels. When sanctions hit one supplier, the network reshuffles. After Xiamen Limbach was sanctioned in October 2025, a new entity appeared within weeks: Beijing Xichao International Technology and Trade. Same engines, same destination, different name on the paperwork. Treasury officials privately call it the Hydra problem. Cut off one head, two more grow back. The most revealing case involved Chinese drone engines shipped to Russia, labeled as industrial refrigeration units. The physical dimensions were identical. The customs declarations just changed the product category. When European investigators flagged the discrepancy, the shipments had already been delivered and installed. This isn't sloppiness. It's a system designed to operate at the boundary between legal commerce and weapons proliferation. Consider the numbers. Iran's drone arsenal before the war included several thousand Shahed 136 variants, plus Mohajer and Ababil families for surveillance and tactical strikes. After Operation Epic Fury destroyed 66% of Iran's known drone production sites, analysts expected output to collapse. Instead, within weeks, production resumed at dispersed facilities using pre-positioned Chinese component stockpiles. The reason is inventory. Iran doesn't order drone parts just in time like a Toyota factory. It's stockpiles. Intelligence estimates suggest Tehran maintained between 12 and 18 months of component inventory at any given time, spread across dozens of warehouses, many underground. The bombing destroyed assembly lines. It didn't destroy the warehouse full of Chinese semiconductors buried under a mountain in Isfahan. And the pipeline kept flowing. Chinese dual-use exports to Iran actually spiked after the June 2025 U.S. airstrikes on nuclear facilities, according to the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. The pattern is consistent. Every American military escalation triggers a Chinese resupply surge. Not as retaliation, Beijing claims, but as normal commercial activity responding to market demand. The system works because the volume of global trade in dual-use electronics is so vast that no customs authority can inspect more than a fraction of it. Components are one thing, but China has gone further. In early 2026, multiple intelligence reports confirmed that Beijing delivered approximately 1,000 fully assembled long-range loitering munitions to Iran. Not parts, complete weapons. The transfer happened overland, through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. CPEC is a $62 billion infrastructure network that connects China's western provinces to Pakistan's Gwadar port on the Arabian Sea. Built as a commercial trade route, it's become something else entirely. A strategic military logistics corridor that bypasses every maritime choke point the U.S. Navy monitors. The drones traveled by road and rail from western China into Pakistan, then were transferred to Iranian-controlled logistics at the border. Pakistan's role as a corridor, not a customer, gives Islamabad plausible deniability. The cargo is in transit. Pakistan doesn't inspect Chinese military shipments any more than Panama inspects what goes through its canal. But CPEC isn't the only route. China also ships material through Russia and the Caspian Sea. Moscow provides a northern corridor, where Chinese weapons components enter Russia by rail, cross into Turkmenistan or Azerbaijan, and reach Iran from the north. Russia's own Liana spy satellite system contributes intelligence data, identifying U.S. carrier strike group positions and sharing targeting information with Tehran. There's also an air bridge. Military transport flights between Chinese and Iranian airfields have increased since the war began, though both governments deny their purpose. And Iran operates a drone factory in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, inaugurated in May 2022, that assembles Chinese components into Ababil 2 tactical drones, outside of Iranian territory entirely. The architecture is redundant by design. Block one route and three others absorb the traffic. This is what military planners call distributed logistics, and it's the same concept that makes the internet resilient to node failure. except instead of data packets, it's kamikaze drones. Meanwhile, China's strategic ambition is hiding in plain sight. The 25-year, $400 billion cooperation agreement signed in 2021 isn't just about oil and trade. It includes military cooperation, intelligence sharing, and technology transfer. China has effectively become Iran's defense industrial partner, supplying not just components, but entire weapon systems, satellite infrastructure, and the logistics networks to deliver them. The US-China Economic and Security Review Commission put it bluntly. Chinese exports of dual-use technology to Iran spiked after Trump signed the Maximum Pressure Memorandum, and again after the June 2025 US airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Every American escalation triggers a Chinese resupply. The escalation ladder has a shadow, a supply ladder climbing right alongside it. There's also the Tajikistan angle that rarely makes headlines. Iran operates a fully functional Ababil II tactical drone factory in Dushanbe, inaugurated in May 2022 under a bilateral defense agreement. The facility assembles Chinese components into finished weapons on Central Asian soil, completely outside the reach of strikes on Iranian territory. If every factory in Iran were leveled tomorrow, Dushanbe would keep building. And then there's the financial architecture. The proceeds from Iran's shadow oil sales to China don't just buy consumer goods. A significant portion cycles back into weapons procurement. Oil revenues flow through Hawala networks, Hong Kong shell companies, and construction for oil swaps. The same financial infrastructure that moves $139 million per day in oil money also funds the purchase orders for drone components. It's a closed loop. Chinese oil purchases fund Iranian weapons purchases from China. Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody in Washington wants to say out loud. The sanctions architecture built to prevent exactly this scenario has categorically failed. Not partially, not occasionally, structurally. The US has sanctioned Chinese front companies. It has designated Hong Kong intermediaries. It has blacklisted specific vessels, specific individuals, specific bank accounts. Treasury and commerce actions frequently identify and designate Chinese individuals, entities, and addresses, according to the USCC. The word frequently is doing heavy lifting in that sentence. Since 2023, the United States has sanctioned entities in Iran, China, Turkey, Germany, India, Ukraine, Hong Kong, and the UAE tied to Iran's drone and missile programs. 32 companies in the most recent round alone. The result? Iran's drone production capacity has increased, not decreased. Russia produces 2,700 Shahed variants per month at Yelabuga. Iran is rebuilding factories that were bombed in June 2025 using Chinese-supplied equipment shipped through sanctioned networks. The problem is structural. Dual-use technology is, by definition, technology with legitimate civilian applications. A semiconductor that guides a drone also runs a dishwasher. A navigation receiver that targets a military base also helps a fishing boat find harbor. Banning these items means banning a significant portion of global electronics trade, which no government is willing to do. China knows this. Beijing's official position is that it opposes unilateral sanctions and conducts normal trade with Iran. When confronted with evidence of military end use, Chinese officials point to the dual-use classification and the impossibility of monitoring every transaction in a $500 billion annual electronics export market. They're not entirely wrong, and that's the infuriating part. The numbers make the enforcement challenge visceral. The global dual-use electronics trade involves millions of transactions per day across hundreds of thousands of companies. Customs authorities can physically inspect perhaps 2% of shipments. The remaining 98% clear based on documentation, which is whatever the shipper says it is. A flight controller labeled as a hobbyist drone stabilizer passes customs in Shenzhen the same way a voltage regulator labeled as a power supply unit clears Dubai. Nobody checks what it actually does until it shows up inside a downed Shahed in Kiev or a missile crater in Riyadh. And there's a deeper problem. China isn't just a supplier, it's the supplier. Chinese firms manufacture an estimated 70% of the world's consumer electronics components. For many of the parts inside Iranian drones, there is no alternative source. You can sanction every Chinese entity involved, and Iran can simply order from the next one, because the next one is also in China. The sanctions regime was designed for a world where supply chains were linear and traceable. Company A sells to Company B, which exports to Country C. In that world, you sanction Company A and the chain breaks. But modern supply chains are networked, adaptive, and deliberately opaque. The chain doesn't break. It reroutes. Russia learned this lesson in Ukraine. Western sanctions were supposed to cripple Russia's ability to wage war. Instead, Russia's drone program expanded, powered by Chinese components routed through Central Asian transit points. Iran watched, took notes, and replicated the model. Now both countries share suppliers, logistics corridors, and evasion techniques. The Atlantic Council calls it a self-reinforcing production network, fueled by Western components, Chinese procurement channels, and Russian manufacturing capacity. And at the center of it all sits China. Not as a rogue actor skulking in the shadows, but as the world's factory doing what factories do, filling orders. The difference is that some of those orders end up inside weapons that kill people. And China has decided, strategically and deliberately, that this is an acceptable cost of doing business with its most important oil supplier and its most useful geopolitical partner. The $400 billion cooperation agreement isn't just an economic pact, it's a strategic bet. Beijing is betting that the American-led sanctions order will fracture before the China-Iran supply chain does. 5 weeks into this war, with sanctions multiplying and the pipeline flowing faster than ever, that bet is looking increasingly safe. Step back for a moment and consider the full picture. The United States can put a Tomahawk cruise missile through a specific window of a specific building in Tehran. It can track individual tankers across oceans using satellite imagery. It can freeze bank accounts in Hong Kong with a single treasury designation. The most powerful surveillance and enforcement apparatus in human history applied with full force to a single problem, stopping Iran from getting weapons. And a $12 voltage converter still makes it from Shenzhen to Isfahan. There's a phrase that keeps appearing in every intelligence assessment, every think tank report, every congressional briefing about this subject. Axis of evasion. 3 words that describe something the post-Cold War sanctions framework was never built to handle. A coordinated network of major economies, each filling a different role, collectively rendering economic pressure meaningless. China provides the components and the money. Russia provides the logistics corridor and the intelligence. Iran provides the demand and the battlefield. Each one is sanctioned. None of them are isolated. And the system is self-reinforcing. Chinese components fund Iranian weapons. Iranian oil funds Chinese purchases. Russian logistics enable the delivery, and the war creates the demand that drives the cycle forward. America has spent trillions of dollars on the most sophisticated military in human history. It can destroy a drone factory in Iran in 45 minutes, but it cannot stop a $12 voltage converter from leaving a warehouse in Shenzhen. That asymmetry between the ability to destroy and the inability to control supply chains is the defining strategic challenge of this century. The drones keep flying because the parts keep shipping. The parts keep shipping because the trade keeps flowing. The trade keeps flowing because no sanction, no embargo, and no bomb can reach the point where a purchasing agent in a Hong Kong office clicks confirm order on a dual-use component that will end up inside a weapon that will end up in a war. That's the gap in the system. The gap between a $2 million cruise missile that can destroy a factory and a $12 component that can rebuild the weapon the factory made. And right now, 5 weeks into the largest military operation against Iran in history, with the Strait of Hormuz functionally closed, with oil at $112 a barrel, with a presidential ultimatum expiring tonight, nobody has a plan to close it. Not the Pentagon, not the Treasury, not the State Department. The drones keep flying, the parts keep shipping, and China keeps filling orders.